So today we're joined by Gabriel Olivier. Is that how you say your name? Right?
That's right. You got it right.
So Gabriel Olivier, a street preacher whose case has now reached the center of one of the most important recent First Amendment disputes involving public preaching in America. Gabriel won a unanimous decision victory at the United States Supreme Court on March 20th, 2026. They ruled that he can continue his lawsuit challenging the city of Brandon, Mississippi's ordinance. So I want to just give a brief background from my understanding, and you can say this and give me some background as well if some of this needs to be elaborated on here, Gabriel. But essentially, from what I saw, is you've been preaching in this area in Brandon, and they made a new rule around a facility that essentially had a lot of entertainment around it because of groups. I don't know if it was exactly just your group or other groups that were getting a lot of attention from sinners. And from what was written in articles, at least, they said that you challenged that by walking onto public areas that were seemingly forbidden, which seems unconstitutional, but they arrested you. And Gabriel pleaded no contest, and it took a couple years, but the Supreme Court wants to hear, I believe, further arguments is why they signaled this. And I sure hope to God that they hear it further, because this is going to open up so many things for street preachers. It's going to open up buffer zones, meaning people aren't going to have to be forced into certain areas at events to preach and talk to people. And it also opens up amplification in some events as well. But I think most importantly, it doesn't keep people like us from talking to people in areas in which they are, which a lot of people are existing in entertainment venues. So if you have anything else to elaborate on as far as what this opens up or what you're allowed to speak about on this open case, please let me know. But I would like to open up to you just kind of what your thoughts are on what's happened and what's going to happen in the future with the Supreme Court.
So. Yeah, and it was such a neat experience to be able to go to that level. I never really, when we started this 5 years ago, was when I was arrested. I never really thought it was going to get to this level. I've been arrested numerous times. I think last I counted, I think it was 7 times I've been arrested during the course of preaching the gospel and street ministry related issues. And so I've always dealt with city and county level stuff, and it's never gone any further than that. A lot of the stuff that I've been involved with has been dismissed and just low level stuff that usually doesn't get any notoriety. But I never really thought that this deal in Brandon, Mississippi was going to go all the way to the Supreme Court, and it did. But it was a really neat experience, man. Though we see that where the Lord really answered a lot of our prayers, and so it's an interesting case, and I can share a little bit more about the background of the ordinance itself. But if you're asking me about my thoughts on the ramifications of this case, it's an interesting one. It's different because there's really 2 big components to this case. And the first one is the one that the Supreme Court just dealt with, which is due process. There was very little to deal with free speech with our challenge to the Supreme Court. Because as I'll share later, the fact that my lawsuit was thrown out by the federal judge here in Mississippi and did not allow it to proceed against Brandon on account of a very bad interpretation of Heck v. Humphrey being used against someone it was never intended to be used against when it was ruled on. I believe 1994 is when that Supreme Court case came out. And so it was a matter of due process and whether I'm entitled to my day in court. And the ramifications of that are massive. It's not just me. And to be honest with you, it's not just street preachers. I think this is an American citizenship issue where it appears that a case that was ruled on dealing with prisoners, people who were found guilty of crimes, and in order to, from my limited legal understanding, it seemed like it was a court decision that was trying to prevent a backlogging of lawsuits being in the system from everybody who's been convicted of a crime trying to sue the municipality that arrested them. That's my understanding of it. And the heart of why Heck v. Humphrey was written in 1994 simply did not apply to my kind of a case. It was never intended to be used against free speech issues. And it was never intended to prevent people from pursuing lawsuits who were not prisoners. I never spent a day in jail. I was processed and given an ROR release, but I never spent a day in jail due to my conviction. And so at that rate, it really became a big due process issue of whether I'm entitled to my day in court. And as you said, gratefully, the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 in my favor. And so now we proceed to phase 2 of this, which is dealing with the free speech, which is just as important. But we would not have been able to get to this phase had we not been able to conquer the due process portion of this first. So now the federal judge will be forced to rule on the lawsuit, and will have to judge the lawsuit based on its merit and not whether it is a applicable lawsuit or not. And so we're excited to put this to the test to see if he'll make the right decision here. We're confident. Me and my legal team are confident that we're in the right here. And that the activities that I was partaking in that day 5 years ago were constitutional protected activity. In numerous parts of the First Amendment, I was within safe area there, and we're looking forward to hopefully winning that fight. Looking to get injunctive relief against the enforcement of that ordinance, which would effectively make the ordinance invalid. And then get back out there and start preaching without fear of being arrested anymore.
So, can I ask this? And it's okay if you don't have to answer. So that ordinance still being valid in Brandon, do you or some of your team that you're with or work with, do they still go out to that location, or they avoid it because of the ordinance?
We largely avoid it. I've been out there one time in the past 5 years just to kind of scope, see how things were, but nothing has changed. I was asked to leave and I left. At the time that the ordinance was written, we were the only group that was going out. Was the team that I was with, and to my knowledge, there have not been more than that one group of preachers who has gone out. So the argument that the city of Brandon has made is that this is more of a this is for everybody. They've argued that the writing of this ordinance was not about us is complete foolishness. In fact, if you read the individual components of the ordinance, it might as well say ordinance against street preachers. I mean, because it literally defined every aspect of street evangelism and what we do. And based on the nature that we were the only folks coming out and doing any sort of free speech practice or religious assembly, it's kind of a bad legal argument to say that they wrote that with everybody in mind.
Yeah, and I'll keep this, in thoughts and prayers, and try to keep tabs on it. I got some notifications to make sure I hear everything comes out. As soon as I heard your case come out with the free speech, it hit all the radars, the notifications I was looking for, because I was like, yes. I was like, no way. I know, just like you said, Huggs versus Humphrey, it's a due process issue, but I always think in the back of my head is I sure hope they chose your case because they wanted to signal to hear it further, the rest of it, and of course they can't say that as judges or whoever else determined it, but that's sure my hope and my prayer is that somebody inside or somebody pushing the buttons up top was like, hey, this needs to be heard. This is ridiculous, and
So there was a couple really neat things that happened on the tail end of this. Not only do we get a unanimous unanimous vote, I'm hoping that unanimous vote will speak very clearly to the federal judge of the nature of this case. And I understand they weren't ruling on the merit of the lawsuit itself. They were simply ruling on whether or not I was allowed to pursue it. But there was still some discussion during the course of those arguments on December 3rd in the courtroom regarding free speech, the fact that I was a preacher and the fact that there seemed to be a personal bias used against me because of my message. And I'm hoping that unanimous decision will speak volumes to the federal judge or to anyone else that's going to be involved if we do end up having to appeal this decision of his if he doesn't rule in our favor. I'm hoping that will speak volumes. The other thing is that and I did not have Justice Kagan writing my opinion on my bingo card for 2026, but the way that they wrote the opinion of my case actually did the public a lot of favors in helping to clearly define the scope of Heck v. Humphrey and to make it clear this was never intended to be used against people like me.
Right. And it seemed to me after reading at least you're so well versed in this, I'm sure you've been waiting for it, but one promise, at least I saw in that, was that there's a potential for, and the constitutional lawyers will tell you is don't get arrested, don't get arrested. We don't get, you got to take care of the crime before we take care of anything else. You got to take care of, and so that instruction, essentially, whenever that Supreme Court ruling was overturned, we have recourse as street preachers if we're oppressed or abused by police in any area. We're allowed to sue immediately for our rights because of what happened, and that's some intense fruit that makes me happy. That's happened because God's been working through you and your people, and I'm grateful for that. And I sure hope other street preachers and evangelists see that and appreciate it. Because if anything, everybody was worried about us turning into the UK, turning into something that was, when you look at the streets, even other people might not like street preachers that aren't Christians and everything else, but whenever the streets start getting shut off from Christians being able to speak what the Bible says, everything else starts to flow out and diminish. It get destroyed. The entire nation becomes different because we're not able to, as Christians, we're not able to rebuke and give the correction in the street. And they hate him who cries out at the gate, as the Bible says. There's so many things about whenever we're out in the street, preaching the gospel that change the atmosphere in a nation. And I don't think maybe some people think that's foolish, but I think as do other street preachers that have been out there. If you've been in front of a drag show, an abortion clinic, or anything where you've seen somebody turn around and run away just because of you standing up for the gospel, there's something that happens, right. And they might tell their friends or somebody else, and a family's changed, somebody's changed. Maybe not somebody's saved every time, but a life is saved, a mind is changed, and God is glorified. So that's something that's just good. And I want to open it up too. And you've said a lot of really cool stuff, but I want to just ask you is, given you had to boldly step forward, and I know I don't want you to say as much as you want about that, but you, after the ordinance was written, and it was written specifically, probably due, of course, to the people that went out there, it was just you and your people, but you boldly, probably filled with the Holy Spirit, however you felt like God was leading you to go out there and get arrested. I don't know if you knew you're going to get arrested. You might have known that or not, but I don't want you to have to answer that if you don't want to. But I want you to just tell us is, your goals are never get arrested probably, but there's times in which God has led you to be bold and stand up when you're supposed to stand up, even though even the law around you might not tell you can't, right? And so maybe what is your advice for other street preachers in that situation? What would just give us kind of your thought process, and
I mean, it's an interesting thing, for a lot of people, when you talk to preachers, they'll give you a lot of opinions. Those opinions are largely going to be based on their personal experiences. Mine probably wouldn't be any different. There's not necessarily a lot of biblical instruction about, whether to choose to get arrested or not get arrested or how to deal with cops. So, it's a little bit open-ended. You have to feel it out as you go along. I can speak for myself in terms of this, this particular incident. I actually did not intend to get arrested. It's up to that point, it was kind of a normal thing for me to get arrested. There was a string of incidents that occurred in Jackson and some other places where arrests happened, and okay, you just deal with it when it happens. There's some times where I get a very strong sense from the Lord that, hey, I'm on a public sidewalk, I'm preaching out of my Bible, I'm handing out tracts. This cop comes up and decides he's going to be bully and tell me that I've got to obey him rather than God or rather than the law of the land. And I'll say, nope, knowing full well that a no usually enrages a tyrannical cop who expects and is used to people who immediately get on their knees and start licking boots. But a part of that is a boldness to say, no, God told me to come today, and this is what I'm going to do. The other part of it is a realization of what could happen later if I allow this to happen without any sort of consequences. So to elaborate on that, there are some places and some cities that I can go today that I can preach freely, have been doing so for years, and have never been legitimately bothered by the police. And the reason for that is because other men of God who are older than me have preached in those places, have suffered the consequences of preaching there, and have taken the time to fight legal battles, whether they got arrested or not. But they took the time to invest their time and their money and fight legal battles, win big cases, that allow me the opportunity to come in later as a younger preacher and enjoy the fruits of the freedom to preach there. I don't feel comfortable with taking advantage of the battles that other men have fought and using it for what I want to do, and not being willing to also lay down on the barbed wire for somebody else after me to use. Does that make sense? So, I mean, we often say, well, I've got the right to do this or that, but how was our rights given to us? Was it just the fact that they wrote them on paper and signed it, or was it the fact that men willingly went to battle and died because they knew that their children were only going to have those rights guaranteed if blood was shed? And so they sacrificed themselves that other generations after them could benefit from freedom. And of course, that's a different example, going to battle and then, getting arrested for disorderly conduct. It's not exactly the same thing, but the principle applies that if I want my children to stand up boldly, they need to see an example of a father who also stood up boldly. And if I turn tail and run every single time a cop says that I can't preach here, well, at some point in the coming years, there ain't going to be a single spot left in the cities I preach in where I can preach, because I've set a principle of I'm going to run every time you tell me to run. So that's specifically in Brandon. I did not come with the intention of getting arrested. I did know about the ordinance and had read about it, because they actually passed it during COVID when the amphitheater was shut down. So it was kind of I don't know for sure if that was the reasoning they used, but it was conveniently a very quiet time to just kind of throw that ordinance in there when people weren't coming to city council meetings and there was not a lot of publicity about this stuff because everyone's just hiding out in their house. So I knew of the ordinance, and I went with the intention to just document and film. What was interesting is at the time I was arrested, I was actually in no way violating any of the components of the ordinance.
Wow.
Those components included preaching with your raw voice, preaching with an amplifier, handing out. They said you were not allowed to hand out literature. They said you were not allowed to have signs lifted 4 feet above your head, aka banners. Trying to think.
Wow.
What else. They
so
also
specific, huh?
Yes, very.
It might as well
specific.
just said Brandon Olivier and his crew just coming out to preach. Yeah. You guys can't do that. That's the ordinance.
They almost in a way overplayed their hand, and I'm hoping that'll come back to get them in court. But I actually was not doing any of those things. My brother was preaching, and I was just filming and documenting, and in no way violating any statute of that ordinance. It was when the police chief came up to me, and we had a very short conversation. He informed me that we had to go stand in the designated protest zone, which was a spray painted 10 by 10 box about 100 yards away from our location, where we would not be able to be heard or have interactions with anybody to talk. So, I simply told him that we didn't believe that was lawful, that we wanted to try to get some answers from the police chief about why they thought it was lawful to restrict our free speech in that way. And it was a very calm discussion. Neither of us were yelling or angry with each other. It was a very respectful, calm conversation. And then, man, just after a couple of questions, just for my legal purposes, with every intent to film it and then walk away. And I said, I'm going to call my lawyer and see what we can do about it. And then he jumped out of the golf cart and said, all right, that's it. And cuffed me up and then arrested my brother as well while he was preaching. So then proceeded to point at my wife and my 2 toddler children at the time and tell them that if they didn't immediately leave the premises, they were going to be arrested as well. So not only did he violate my rights, but he also threatened my wife and my children with a arrest for simply standing across the street holding a sign quietly. So it really snowballed into a lot. But in terms of dealing with the police, man, I've got like if you'll let me run through it, I've got like a little short list of things that I think are good points to consider.
I'd love to hear this. Yeah, I'd love to hear this. Yeah.
and this is coming from 10 years. I
And many
started.
people would, by the way. Many people, the questions I get from people, they and yeah, they want to know, and they want to, they sometimes they want to see me deal with police better, and they want to hear about how to
Sure.
deal with them better too themselves. So go ahead.
Yeah, and some of these things are a matter of just walking in the spirit, not in the flesh, because there's a lot of stuff I can choose to do in the flesh that it may sound righteous and it may end up being unrighteous depending on how I feel about the situation. But I've been street preaching since about 2 weeks after I got saved 10 years ago, I've learned a few things here and there, made a ton of mistakes in how I deal with police. And the best advice that I can give, one thing that I recommend actually is if you're traveling to a city that you don't normally travel to, so they may not be aware of who you are or what you do, I find it very helpful to send a legal letter. I have a legal letter that I have drafted up that I can simply replace it with the names and information of city officials that I'm going to. And that letter will contain a variety of laws, Supreme Court decisions, just to try to educate the city officials or the county officials wherever I'm going. Of the fact that I am aware of the law. I'm intending to be a law-abiding citizen. I'm coming to your city on these days to preach the gospel. I don't give a ton of information, exactly where and how long I'll be out there. I'm just going to let them know, hey, I'm coming to your city soon, and I will intend to preach the gospel. And I want to inform you that I'm well aware of my rights to do so. And I also want to inform you of the potential actions that could take place should my rights be restricted. It doesn't, it doesn't have to be a direct threat or anything. It just could be an information of just letting you know, hey, I don't want to catch you off guard, but this is what I'm doing. I've actually found that to be very helpful in a lot of cities. I've had mayors and police chiefs respond to me by email personally and say, hey, thank you for sending that to me. This is going to help us know a lot, because inevitably when we get calls saying there's a crazy man screaming outside of a bar on Broadway Street on Nashville or whatever, then we're going to understand what this is and we're going to know how to deal with it. And thank you for sending this and letting us know. And then I won't have any problems there whatsoever. And that's been very helpful.
Sure. Can I get that letter and maybe attach it to this? I'll attach it to the videos, like as a link. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah. I can try to send you a version of what I send out.
Yeah,
Sure.
any version really that's you're comfortable with. Yeah, just so people can kind of see kind of what you're talking about and also use it if they need to.
Yeah, sure. So. Absolutely. Another thing, man, it really helps to be aware of local ordinances. Every city is going to be a little bit different. Some cities have a lot in common. They're going to have the pretty standard wording when you go onto municicode.com and then type in the city you're looking for. Most of the time Municicode or Municode, whatever it's called, they'll normally have a pretty accurate list of that city or county's ordinances. It's helpful to go and read the parts about sound. Most of them likely are going to be unconstitutional laws, but it still helps to know what they are so you know what you're dealing with. Because here's the problem: when a police officer comes up to you and while you're preaching and says, hey, we've got a sound ordinance, you're not allowed to be using an amplification device out here. It's helpful to know whether that sound ordinance even exists, regardless of whether it's unconstitutional or not. And you can have that conversation with them. Sometimes I've had cops come up to me and tell me about an ordinance that actually doesn't even exist. They're completely bullcrapping you.
Right.
And they just want you to.
They do that a lot, and they kind of joke about it sometimes. Not all of them, but you're right. That's one of the most difficult things, I agree, to deal with when you're doing amplification. And it's a gray area in some places, but also many cops will deal with it different ways, because sometimes there'll be decibel limits, right? And sometimes there'll be actual information about residential areas where it's disallowed, and sometimes there won't be amplification at all. It'll just say just loud and disturbing noises at a reasonable level. Right. I've seen really weird stuff happen as well, but what are your thoughts on that? If there's not, how do you, that's maybe in that specific situation, how have you dealt with a police officer that has told you that gave you a wrong law? You knew the law, or you found out differently later and came back and were able to get your amplification back, without having to go to court, maybe?
Yeah. So normally what I do is I will download a copy of the sound ordinance for the city that I go to, have it on my phone, have it pulled up and ready to go. Most of the time, that's probably what cops are going to ask you about anyway, is the content of your sound, more so than the content of your speech. So what I'll do is I'll point it out, and, let's just say, for instance, he'll say, hey, you're too loud. Well, I can sit here and have a back and forth with the cop all day long. No, I'm not too loud. Yes, you're too loud. No, I'm not too loud. Okay, well, then we're just having a yelling match at each other. The more it happens, we both get irritated, and then nothing good happens for them. He's either going to call back up and they're going to come harass you, or he's going to get angry, make an arrest, and then you got to deal with that. I think a simple question is the best thing to do. Well, sir, could you please inform me about the decibel limits of your sound ordinance so I can be aware of that? Okay, well, likely 99% of the time he has no idea if there is one or not. So he's going to have to, and by the way, you need to be recording every instance of your street preaching. Do not start recording just when cops get there. You need to, if you're a street preacher and you don't have a camera on you from the moment you get out of your car until the moment you get back in, I just don't understand why you don't. I
agree.
So many
from the moment you get out and get back in, they'll try you on everything.
Yes.
And
anybody at any given moment, cops or not, can make a accusation against you, and having a video of every second you were out on the street is so helpful to deter those false accusations in court. But I digress. So he's going to have to go and figure out what is the decimal limit. Okay, well, he'll come back and say, well, you're not allowed to be higher than 65 decibels out here. Okay, thank you for that information, officer. Could you please inform me how you measured it? A lot of cops don't even know, but they're legally required in just about every city in the country to have a decibel reader before they inform somebody that their sound is too loud. I've dealt with hundreds of cops, and I've never seen one with a decibel reader. So that's a good way to let them know, hey, you're ill prepared for this conversation because you don't even have any capability. One cop is going to say that's too loud. Another one doesn't think it's loud enough. And it's all dependent on that police officer's hearing levels. And you can have that conversation.
Let me, I don't want to stop can I interrupt for just a second?
Yeah.
So I was going to tell you and some other people on, just if they've gotten this far, is just about there's an incident I had in Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and they made a decibel policy specifically after I started preaching, maybe kind of like you happened with you and Brandon, right? So there was other preachers preaching there for years with decibel with amplification, and then 2 weeks literally after I started preaching there, they changed it. They changed the policy to where they changed the decibel limit to basically lower the natural voice from like 5 or 10 feet away. So they made it to where it was almost impossible to hear. And so I got to a point where they I got a constitutional lawyer. Somebody helped me to figure that out. They told the university, they sent a demand letter to them, like, you can't do this, essentially. And they, went back and forth, and I didn't have the money to do it, and I wish I would have, but they they didn't want a lot. They wanted just a little bit to be able to put it into a federal case because it's expensive to do that. At first it was pro bono, but anyway, they tried to they said a federal case could have been made out of that for all campuses for amplification, because amplification is a big issue. I don't think a lot of townships or campuses or even places really care about those ordinances until somebody gets a lot of attention, and it causes, and not the amplification itself, but they try to do whatever they can to silence us preachers. And I think a lot of times, like in that instance, that's what happened. But I'm just kind of sharing this with people because they will try to use that any kind of ordinance, like, and try to interpret a different way, and without using decibel limits, without any defined, you can't use amplification. And you have to be able to articulate and tell them, this is your ordinance, this is what it says. And but it's still at the same time is, there's a limit sometimes in which cops you're dealing with, and how far you're going to get with that, so sometimes it can be difficult,
that's in no way a guarantee that they're going to respond to that. Some of them are going to just be even more angry that what you're talking about, because they know they're not dealing with a slave there. So It's you have to deal with that as you come with it. It's best to try to, respond calmly if the police officer. I'm not saying I've always been best at this. I've gotten into my yelling matches too, but it's best to respond calmly if an officer's angry about it. And at the end of the day, if you get the feeling that the cop is not intending to honor constitutional law and allow you to have your rights unrestricted, I just throw out the most important question legally that I think you can ask, which if anybody's listening to this, if you don't, remember anything else from this conversation, remember this: is this under threat of arrest? That's the most important question you could ever ask. It's going to be the heaviest weighted question in the courtroom, is if you can have a police officer tell you, yes, this is under threat of arrest. Personally, I recommend, all right, fine, walk away and contact your lawyer and pursue it from there. If a police officer is hesitant to tell you it's under arrest, well, you have a foot in the door that he has a feeling he's not giving a lawful order here, because if a police officer is giving a lawful order and you're not obeying it, he should have absolutely no qualms about saying, yes, this is under threat of arrest.
So is that a specific question you ask? Sometimes I ask, like, what's going to happen if I don't oblige to this command you're giving me? You're saying what? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that's the way that I phrase it. I'm sure you could probably phrase it a little different way, but I've learned that legally in court, that's probably the best way to say it, because that's what they are doing when they're insinuating an arrest, is they're threatening you with that. And so I think it's good to have that wording of a threat of arrest, and it's just a very direct one. It's important to bring up arrest, because if you just say, well, what are you going to do after that? Police officers are very, very good at spinning your words. And so it's best to speak in short sentences. Don't speak on information that you don't need to. Use the Fifth Amendment wherever possible. If I say something like, well, what are you going to do if I don't? Depending on the tone that I give it in, a cop can say, oh, that sounds like a threat against a police officer. So now we've got you for that. So it's best just to try to speak as legally as you can, and try to just keep it very short. Is this under threat of arrest? Will I be arrested if I don't comply to this? Don't tell them I'm not going to comply. Don't tell them I will comply. Just ask them, will I be arrested if I don't comply? And then you'll have to make a decision what to do with that. I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong by saying, all right, well, I choose not to comply, and then you get arrested. I've done it, and it's been used for good. I would say probably more often than not, it's best not to get arrested. Just for legal reasons, it's a lot easier to proceed with a civil case as quickly as possible if you don't have to get mired down in a criminal case, because the process is the punishment. These guys will manage to take a disorderly conduct charge or a disobeying a law enforcement order charge, something stupid and vague, and they'll continue the snot out of it until you've been in court for a year and a half. You've had to pay for legal fees, and that's what they want to do, is frustrate you to where I don't want this to ever happen again. You can do that, but if you do get found, if you get found guilty of those charges, or like I did, I pled no contest in Brandon, which is still a conviction though, then it makes it a lot harder to go after damages. You're not able to go after damages afterwards. You can still pursue a lawsuit for injunctive relief, but you're not able to go after damages. And damages are really where the city hurts, because damages have to be admitted in the financial reports to the public, and the members of the public that bother to read that stuff, they're going to see that. They're going to see that, man, we lost $4 million or whatever because our city decided they couldn't handle someone on the public sidewalk preaching the gospel.
Well, I think sometimes more, that's important, but I think it's even better because sometimes, especially on sidewalks, in public areas, a lot of times whenever there's not just injunctive relief, but damages, police officers are liable for their personal salaries if they oppress you in certain ways.
Yes.
If they kick somebody off the sidewalk, for instance, any sidewalk in the United States that somebody's allowed to be on for any reason, that is a violation of civil rights. Right. And it's not, and like you said, you don't have to get, and this is important for people to hear, I think, too, because you are, in, without getting arrested, if somebody gives you the threat of arrest, if a police officer gives you the threat of arrest, it's still actionable legally, just as if you were arrested, not damages wise, but it's still the same legal. I don't know what under color of law, essentially, they've threatened, not just threatened you, but they've deprived you of your rights if it's actually what they're doing, And so, that's important legally to get, like you said, get that, and make sure that, because a lot of times, like you said, somebody will twist the words. Some officers are really good at twisting words, and they'll try to, there'll be a really hard, there's not a really easy line if you don't get that voiced out, to where there's kind of a gray area that it's kind of hard to tell if it's harassment or oppressing rights. If it's just like something, and that somebody's going to pick up on. Like, for instance, I've gotten a disorderly ticket once, and the cop never even filed it. I went to court, gone, just for preaching in front of a strip club. And so that that stuff can happen, and after they realize they shouldn't have done it, they'll just stop doing it, and that's a harassment thing. Like, I didn't pursue that, but we can't. And I don't know if this happened to you. Did this happen to you a lot, dealing with these kind of things as soon as you started going out, or just as you started doing it more?
No, it happened almost as soon as I started going out, and it's been a consistent thing. There's very few times where I go out and preach the gospel where I'm not given some level of harassment. It doesn't always escalate into a legal situation, but almost always when I go out, even if it's in the same area, I get repeated interactions with police officers. We got a call, somebody complained. A lot of the times it's, hey, will you do me a favor and move over here? Or will you do me a favor and just come back another day, or whatever? And it's, they say it in a nice way because they're trying to phrase this interaction to be a very low level thing. But what they don't understand is saying, hey, do me a favor, go over there and do it instead, or go away. That's a serious request that they're making. And it's helpful to let them know that, so are you asking for this as a favor, or are you telling me, under a threat of arrest? It's good to make that clear, because cops will try to buddy up to you and make it seem like things aren't really that big of a deal. And I'll do you a favor. Well, you're not doing them a favor. They're just upset because they've had to respond to a call. And okay, well, that's a part of the job. Right. I'm sorry, but you signed up to be a police officer, which means that people are going to call you and make complaints. I mean, I can't keep that from happening, and that's a part of the job. And they'll say, right, and sometimes they'll say words like, hey, you can't do that, or that's not good. It'll say things like that, and it's kind of gray. Like, are they ordering me something, or are they asking me to do it? Yeah.
As a young preacher. And I think that the reason I ask that is because, I don't want people to be discouraged. We have to learn as street preachers to deal with police in any situation. Everything's going to be different. Like you said, it's always something different sometimes, but that's something that early on I really hated dealing with, and I tried to avoid it at all costs, and sometimes just ignore it, but you can't. You have to deal with it. You have to work with police in some ways, and sometimes, especially when there's things that are different, and the laws are different in certain places. So
there's another tactic that cops use a lot is throwing out negative messaging. This is a common tool in the media as well. If journalists want to try to get you with a gotcha entrapment question, is they'll throw out a negative insinuation, and they'll get you to respond to the negative instead of just sticking to your message. And what I mean when I say that is a cop will come up and say, hey, you're out here harassing these people. So what's the negative word in that statement? Harassment, right? That's the negative word. Yeah. That's the big thing that they say that because they want you to focus on that word. I can choose to respond one of two ways. I can say, no, I'm not harassing anybody. And all I've done there is I've given credence to the accusation of harassing by only addressing the negative implication there. What I should be saying is, can you please define for me what harassment is? I'm confused about what that is, and I'm confused about
And
your
this
accusation. Could you tell me what
this is your communication tactics coming on, because you have a degree in communications, am I correct?
Education. This is more stuff I've learned on
Education.
the street.
Well, you seem to be an effective communicator, so that's why. I mean, maybe I heard that or something, but yeah.
Well, some of it is also
So
just learning
it's a good
experiences
tactic,
because
though.
I've not always done this well and have learned the hard way. A lot of this stuff can be summed up with a simple perspective. When this video, if and when this video gets played in court later, how is it going to make me look? And it's best when you're in public to always speak as if the judge is sitting in the room. Now, there's a spiritual application there. We should always be living as if
Amen.
Jesus was in the room with us. But if you're talking from a earthly legal perspective, we should always be speaking as if the judge were there, which means I shouldn't be giving a lot of credence to the negative implication there. I should stick to my message, continue to ask legally binding questions that will incriminate the cop. That's what they do to me. I have no problem doing it back to them. So if they're going to come up and try to get me into a conversation, and I am dumb enough to keep talking and feeding them information and giving them way more than I have to, then I'm going to employ the same strategy against them. And I've learned that there's a lot of simpleton cops on the street that incriminate themselves by talking too much. So sometimes interactions with police officers is a battle of who's going to incriminate themselves first. And if you're smart enough about it, you can get a cop to say and do some things on the street that are going to look very bad in a courtroom. And it's always best to talk and act on the street as if the judge was there, because it's not just what comes out of my mouth, it's what I do with my body. So if I'm having an interaction with a police officer and I'm just hot about the fact that my rights are being violated, I can act calm, cool, and collected, and that's going to look real good to a judge later. Or I can get in the cop's face, I can jam my finger in his nose and start screaming, and there's spit coming out of my mouth, and I'm frothing. What's that? What's that going to accomplish, right? I'm going to go home feeling like, hey, yeah, I really gave that cop the what for. But guess what? When that shows up in court later, that's going to be enough ammo for a judge to say this guy's unhinged and he's crazy and he's a danger to the public, and so I'm going to rule against him. But if you simply go out there, you quote laws, you say, I'm aware of this ordinance, can you explain what harassment means, is this under threat of arrest, you don't get angry, you don't lose control of your bodily functions, that goes a long way with the judge. And if you're dealing with cops that want to restrict your rights, the only thing that matters is how things are going to look in court.
Sure. Okay. I truly appreciate you talking to me this long about all this, and it really helps me, and I sure hope it helps other people too, because as I experienced as well, this is something that's really important as you get out there, because sometimes people take and there's some biblical precedent to this in some ways. The law is there for a godly reason in some respects, but in other respects, it's not. When it's not following God's laws, and it's trying to oppress free speech and oppress the gospel. So,
you have
so it's good to know.
You have two different groups working here. You've got what's lawful, and then you've got what's legal, and the two terms are very different. You've got a very small list of lawful things that we are given as citizens that's summed up in the Constitution, and then you have thousands of pages of law books filled with legal stuff, and
Right.
what a city determines you can do, and what a county says you can do, what a state says, and there's no end to the ordinances. Most police officers don't even know half of these ordinances. And that's another thing you got to consider, is you're also likely dealing with a police officer who is untrained in their own ordinances. They probably have no idea what they're talking about, and which means either get them to incriminate themselves and say things that they're going to regret in court later, or don't talk at all and just let them be in a state of ignorance. And if they choose to do something, well, sometimes you got to deal with that.
All right.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you having me on, man. It's always good to talk to you as well. I appreciate you.
Yeah. God bless you, man. I look forward to seeing you soon.
All right, brother. God bless you, man. See you.
All right. Bless you too.